Today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. Due to the global pandemic, the deadline to file your taxes for 2019 was pushed back to July 15, 2020. If you haven't filed for 19 yet, there's good news. The Tax Defense Group can e-file your taxes for you. The process is quick, and for millions of people, you'll get money back. Call the Tax Defense Group today at 800-850-7973 to get started. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Writer Junkie. Are you thinking about starting a business or a side hustle? Writer Junkie offers website development, content writing, and SEO services for businesses. Call Writer Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. Hi, welcome everyone. This is Marcus with UCast Studios, and today I'm joined by Jonny Arnett from the Jonny Arnett YouTube channel, and we're starting a new podcast today called the Great Western Podcast, where we're going to look at historical Lakers games and kind of talk about them and go into a little detail and kind of do a little bit of a recap and our thoughts and everything. So Jonny, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm really looking forward to kind of reliving big parts of my childhood, to be honest. I love a lot of these games we're going to be covering.
If you wouldn't mind, would you mind kind of introducing us a little bit into the game that we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, for sure. So the game we're going to be talking about is Game 7 of the 1988 NBA Finals, Lakers versus Pistons. So this is deciding Game 7. There's a lot of stuff going into this game. Game 6, the Lakers had just won. That was a must-win game for the Lakers to push it to Game 7, which would be played in LA. In that Game 6, quite a few things happen. Isaiah Thomas injures his ankle pretty badly, and kind of an iconic game. Any Pistons fan will know about it. But he rolls his ankle. He's hobbling all over the place. Isaiah actually drops 25 points in the third quarter alone. So he has a legendary effort, but they still end up losing. His health is in question heading into Game 7, and when Game 7 starts, we can actually see that his ankle's still pretty screwed up, and he's clearly not 100% or close to it. And then Game 6 also had another bit of controversy. You know, if the Pistons win that game, they win the NBA championship, the first championship in franchise history. But as the game's coming to a close, there's final possessions. Bill Laimbeer fouls Kareem Abdul-Jabbar during the middle of a hook shot. And what the Pistons now call the phantom call, the phantom foul, because it doesn't really look like Laimbeer fouled him. Like, maybe he bumped him a little bit, but to call it a foul in the 80s is like blasphemous. And so the Lakers end up winning that game because Kareem goes to the line. He makes both free throws, so now he puts his Lakers up by 1 point. They end up winning the game. And so there was already controversy heading into this game. So that's kind of me prefacing, this deciding game we're heading into.
Yeah, man. I mean, this one, it was really fascinating. So, like, I think you and I, we both watched the game again last night, and dude, like, there was definitely some really interesting points. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is it kind of an exaggeration to say that, like, I kind of thought Kareem was kind of bad in this game?
So, you know what was funny is, I agree. I even had his stats from this game. He shot 2 for 7 from the field, which is extremely inaccurate for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I believe he shot like 55% for his career. And so he was only 2 for 7 from the field, 4 points, 3 rebounds. But Kareem was really old at this point. I remember as a kid, I watched the 86, 87, 88, and the 89 finals a lot on VHS tapes because my dad had all those games recorded. And it always felt like the pecking order on the Lakers was Magic Johnson on top, then James Worthy, then Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I think when people think of these championship runs for the Lakers or finals trips, they think of Magic Johnson, they think of Kareem, then Worthy. But at this point in his career, like, Kareem was just kind of older, and it wasn't normal for him to have only like 4 points, and 3 rebounds a game. But I think it was normal for him to be much, for him to be below on the pecking order behind James Worthy. So yeah, that was something I noticed too. I don't think he scores his first basket till like the third quarter. So that was pretty crazy.
Well, I mean, even watching this game too, I mean, I kind of felt like, James Worthy was the only Laker that really stood out for like playing really well. Like, I mean, it's kind of surprising, like, just even looking at James Worthy's numbers, where I kind of feel like for him, for a lot of people that think of the historical Lakers teams like in the 80s, I mean, I kind of feel like he's a little bit of like the third guy people think about. And, in a lot of ways, I mean, he is a third guy, but I mean, he was a really good player. In that finals, I mean, in Game 7, I mean, I thought he was the best Laker. I mean, the numbers, I mean, that was his best. That was the best game of his career, at least on high stake levels. And like, it's just really fascinating that he just is kind of pushed down to this. Oh yeah, he's the third guy. I mean, I guess that's always a problem when you have a super team as the third guy is just looked upon as, oh yeah, that's right. That's, it's like with even like the Warriors with Steph and Durant. It's like you have Durant, Steph, and then you look at like Clay, and it's like, oh yeah, he's he's a good third guy, but just like the same way like with Clay, like if you put him on a team where he was the best player, he'd average way more points. He probably would have more accolades and this or that, but because he was behind those two, he's kind of forgotten. And I feel like with Worthy, I mean, you look at his career and it's like, I mean, yeah, he's a really good player, but then I mean, he only gets what, like 2 all NBA teams in 90 and 91 in his third team. So it's not even like, I mean, that was the highlight of his career in terms of like individual accolades. I mean, I know he won Finals MVP for this series, but I feel like if he was on another team, like if he, I don't know, you just pick some other random team from the 80s, as long as I guess it wasn't the Celtics or the Pistons, I mean, I feel like he would be I don't know. I feel like he would be more lauded. I think he would have won more individual titles or like individual accolades, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So for this game, Worthy ends up being the Finals MVP, and this game kind of seals it. He had 36 points, 16 rebounds, 10 assists on 68% shooting. Like, there was times in this game, significant stretches in the game, where Worthy's scoring, and he's the only reason the Lakers were in it when it was close. And something else that stood out to me was Worthy was doing a lot of his damage on Dennis Rodman. Like, there's times he's backing him down and abusing Rodman in the paint. And so, yeah, a lot of people forget about James, but I think part of that is just the power of the 80s. I've considered doing a video, I will at some point, a video just on the 80s and how really that was the era of the super teams. Because in a way, you have so many super teams around the league. Like when you look at the Pistons, at one point they had like 4 All-Stars on their team. You look at Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Bill Laimbeer, Adrian Dantley. Coming off the bench, they have Vinnie Johnson, Dennis Rodman. Like, they're loaded. They have like a 9-man rotation that's just solid. And then you look at the Lakers, who at one point, they had Michael Thompson and Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and James Worthy and just multiple All-Stars. And then you forget about guys like Byron Scott, who's significant too. And Michael Cooper, Defensive Player of the Year, also a good three-point shooter, like a fantastic 3-and-D guy. And then you go to the Celtics. They got Parrish and McHale and Bird. So there's just super teams everywhere. And teams, that only have 2 All-Stars, like John Stockton and Karl Malone on the Jazz, or Lafayette Lever and Alex English on the Nuggets, like that's just not going to be enough. Like you need 3 or 4 to really break through in the 80s. But I think part of that is sometimes because there's so many stars that 3rd or 4th best guy on the team sometimes kind of gets forgotten and overlooked. And I think that's kind of what happened with Worthy. Like, he was so good and so much better than a lot of people realized. But when you only have 20 teams in the league or so, and there's so much talent condensed into each team, some of those guys just don't get as much attention as they deserve. So that's kind of, I think, how that happened to James.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, in a sense, it's kind of like a travesty. I mean, if you're a person, if you're not like a big historical follower of the NBA, or if you're not, a Lakers fan, you probably don't really think about James Worthy that often. I mean, at least for us, I mean, we see James Worthy, when there's games, him on the Spectrum shows and this or that, where, he's a regular broadcaster for the Lakers. So it's kind of like, you continuously see him. So it's easy to remember him, but he looked incredible. Like, I couldn't believe, like, when I looked at the All-NBA teams for the 87-88 season, I was surprised that he was nowhere to be seen. I kind of felt like, man, this guy's Finals MVP. He plays all these games. Like, it's not like he missed a ton of games that season. Like, I mean, he played, he was there, and it's like, oh, nothing. I mean, it's just surprising to see. I mean, yeah, so in the 87-88 season, yeah, I mean, where was it? Yeah, he played 75 games. He only missed 7. So, I mean, it's not like, oh, well, he took games off. And, I mean, it's going to be an interesting thing even, like a player that I kind of think that will be missing individual accolades, that I wonder in the future how people are going to view him as, like Kawhi Leonard. I mean, look at a player like that, and it's like, oh, he's never going to win, or he's never won MVP. He's not really, I don't even know how many times he's been on the all NBA teams. I think it's maybe like once or twice, or at least for first team. And I think people in the future, they might think, oh, this guy wasn't really that good. But in reality, it's like, well, he didn't get those accolades because, he didn't really play that many. He took half the season off every year or whatever it may be. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of definitely don't think that was the case with Worthy. I mean, Worthy, he was playing, and yeah, it's unfortunate. I just remember the broadcasters mentioning that. They're like, oh, if he was on another team, he would have more accolades. And yeah, it sucks for him.
I'm not sure, to be honest, if he would have stood out more if he was on another team. I think I could make an argument either way, because it's tough to say, because obviously he wouldn't have won as much. Being the same team with Magic and Kareem helps. But he was also the perfect complementary piece to Magic Johnson, because he did so much of his damage in the fast break. Like, he loved attacking the rim. He was a fantastic finisher, a good leaper. He'd just have his arm fully extended and just glide through the air. And he was good making shots in traffic when he was down low, because most of his damage, most of his scoring's like right around the paint. Every once in a while, he'll shoot a shot from the mid-range, but he's not a fantastic, outside shooter. He wasn't a big three-point shooter, didn't do much on the perimeter, but he was a slasher. And when you're running that fast break, with Magic Johnson, that's the perfect player to be. So I don't know if he would have stood out more. He was also really good in the post. He did a lot of damage from the post. He had such a quick first step, and he had good, he was good with his feet and just really knew how to use the head fake and such. And so just a really intelligent, quick player. But yeah, I don't know if he would have been better outside. Maybe more accolades, but I don't think he would have necessarily been one of the best players in the league per se. But so yeah, really interesting. He was around 20 points per game. Like I said, he wasn't a perfect player. Not a fantastic perimeter shooter, not a really great transcendent defender. He was a decent defender, but nothing to write home about. But yeah, so I don't know. Are you of the opinion he would have been better outside of Los Angeles?
I mean, he probably would have had he probably would have had better numbers, and maybe he did get one or two more accolades. But I mean, in my opinion, though, with Worthy, Magic, and Kareem, this is one of the most historical big threes ever. I know a lot of people, I've heard some talk. It's Manu, Tony Parker, and Duncan were a better big three than Magic, Kareem, and Worthy, and I think that's completely preposterous. But and it was organic too. That was one thing that was so good about it. Magic and Worthy, they played the whole careers with the Lakers, and I think that part was good. But I wanted to ask you, so if this series was replayed 10 times, everyone being the same age, this finals, out of 10 times the series being played, how many times do you think the Pistons would have won?
Oh man, that's a good question. Oh man. Well, so there's a few. The games ended up being close. It comes down to the final play of the game, and there's even controversy there. Isaiah Thomas gets hurt and rolls his ankle, and he was a champ pushing through this 7th game, but his numbers were still well below what they normally were. He plays most of the first half, but you don't see much of Isaiah in the second half, and you got to imagine that's because his ankle was keeping him out. So he doesn't see a ton of minutes. So, man, I know the Lakers won it, but I'm thinking Pistons probably win 6 out of 10 times. I felt like they were the deeper team. Throughout most of the series, they did a better job executing. And the Lakers don't win another championship, until the year 2000 from this point on. This was kind of their last successful run. They meet the Pistons again the following year in '89, but they get absolutely destroyed by the Pistons in that series. Now, health had a little bit to do with it then too, but yeah, I think the Pistons win 6 out of 10 times if you did it that many times.
Yeah, that's kind of more of the vibe that I got too. With the Mad, and this is again too, I think kind of an interesting idea is when I was watching the game. I didn't really get the impression that Magic was phenomenal in the game, and I kind of started to think about if LeBron, let's say you swap him out, LeBron was on that Lakers team and he did what Magic did at that age, I kind of feel like LeBron would have been eaten alive. Even if they won, let's say LeBron has the exact same series that Magic had, and especially Game 7. If that happens this year, if the Lakers were to get to the finals and win, I would just envision that the talking heads would just destroy LeBron. Like, for sure, Skip Bayless would be like, oh, LeBron only won because of, whatever. This person, Kyle Kuzma had a great game, or, obviously, always know Anthony Davis is going to have a great game. But, like, you know what I mean? If one of the role player guys had a really good game. And I feel like, you'd have other guys like Max Kellerman to be like, well, LeBron's not as good as Kawhi or whatever. Like, I would just imagine that LeBron now would just get eaten alive. And when I was watching that, I was just thinking, I'm like, man, I was kind of waiting for Magic to, like, be Magic, like, to look like the best guy on the team. I mean, he was the only person playing in the series that was, like, all NBA first team. Like, I mean, he's an iconic player. He's not that old. I mean, yeah, I was just surprised that I thought he was like, I don't know. I didn't, like, I mean, he wasn't terrible, but I decided he would have been more exceptional.
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, I think Worthy took away some of that, because there's times where the offense is clearly being run through the post, being run through James quite a bit. But Magic plays 40 minutes. I mean, his numbers are nice, but it's just weird how non-exciting he was, considering he put up 19 points and 14 assists. Like, that was the most quiet, like, 19 and 14 I've seen. And he was 6 of 9 from the field, so he was accurate. He put up nice numbers, but for some reason it just didn't feel like he, totally controlled the game to the extent that he normally does. And I think Worthy kind of takes away from that a little bit. I know at certain points during the third quarter, when they really start building a big lead, the Lakers were just really killing them in the fast break, and Magic had a lot to do with that. But you're right. I mean, I think it's kind of fun sometimes to look back on older games like this and be like, how would have social media or, NBA debate shows have handled this? Because Billy Cunningham, who was one of the two commentators, you had Dick Stockton and Billy Cunningham calling the game, and he said something kind of interesting about Isaiah Thomas, is that, Isaiah was really hurt, and he was saying, is he hurting the team? Like, Isaiah's hobbling all over the place just so much that the question is him being out there actually hurting the team? Like, how often do you hear that question asked nowadays? Like, never. You never see a player out there hobbling to such an extent where we have to ask that question if him being out there is actually a bad thing for his squad. And so just thinking about, like, aspects like that and how the media would have handled it. But I don't know. I don't think Magic was anything exciting, but he had a decent game. He had a good game, from the numbers standpoint.
Well, I just think today, I mean, the sports commentators are just so hyperbolic now.
Sure.
It's I mean, I remember when LeBron won the title in 2016, like, Skip was like, the real MVP, Kyrie Irving, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, Kyrie Irving was phenomenal in 2016. Like, he was amazing, but, like, I mean, it was obviously LeBron. I mean, LeBron led, I think, in every statistical category in that series. Like, how can you give this guy crap for coming back 3-1, leading in every statistical category? And, like, I don't know. I mean, obviously, though, like, and I mean, I guess this is the most controversial part, is the end of this game, but, like, if at the end of the game happened today, oh my gosh, it would just blow things up.
Yeah, so let's actually get into that, because so I'll kind of set up, what happens in the game, but it's close. I mean, the Lakers were up by 15 points with like 5 minutes left in the game, and then they just start choking it. The Lakers turned over the ball quite a bit in this game, and that was the only reason why it was close, especially after their monstrous third quarter, is they just couldn't stop turning it over. Magic had like 4 or 5 of those. And so they're turning the ball over quite a bit. And then the game's close. Lambeer just like hucks up a hot potato 3-pointer and makes it like a 1-point game. There's a couple, free throws are made. So ball's getting inbounded. Bill Lambeer's about to toss it in, and there's 2 seconds left. And so the crowd's crazy. It looks like the Lakers are going to win. And then you have dudes on the Lakers bench like starting to step onto the court. You got the ball boy out there, like right beside Bill Lambeer, and then cameramen start walking on the court, basically in front of Bill Lambeer. Like, they're interfering with the game. Game 7 of the NBA Finals. This is the most meaningful possession of the Pistons' lives, and you've got the ball boy like on the court. You've got like the water boy on the court and cameramen. So he inbounds it. Isaiah Thomas gets it. Good option, to get the ball with just moments left. And then Magic kind of hip checks him, and Isaiah falls down, and buzzer sounds, game over, no call, crowd just storms the court. I just feel like nowadays there would be such an uproar, like not just from the Detroit fans, but from the players. Like, remember like the Rockets like a year or two ago when they felt like they were getting cheated, and they were talking about how Warriors were always sliding their feet under them, and how the Warriors are favored by the referees. Like, they're always making a stink about things, and it was always like subtle. There was a lot of things you can like analyze and debate over. Dude, this was obvious that it was wrong on so many levels to the Pistons. My dad watched this game live, and he was a Laker fan. We were talking about this game just a couple days ago. And, obviously he has fond memories of them winning their second straight championship, like us winning our second straight championship, the Lakers. But he says every time he sees the end of the game, he feels gross. Like, every time he goes back and watches it, he just feels gross because it was just wrong. And so, anyway, I have more thoughts on it, but what did you think about that?
No, man, I mean, you're right. I mean, it would never happen today. We're like literally like Bill Laimbeer. There's down 2 seconds ago. And like, there's a bunch of people on the court, like a lot, like numerous people. Like, there's cameramen like literally in the middle of the backcourt for the Pistons. And like, they're right there. I mean, you couldn't believe, like, it would never happen today. There's no way they let people on the court that early. And then you're right. Like, I mean, Laimbeer passes the ball to Thomas, and like, I mean, Magic totally just like the foul is so, like, I mean, there's so many errors. Like, there's so many things that happen there. If something that controversial happened today, the Pistons, they would be calling for a replay of the last 2 seconds. People on the talking heads would be slamming it. The Twitterverse would be going nuts. I mean, people would be like in an uproar. I mean, it would be like joked. I mean, people, they would be like parroting it or spoofing it, like on like these late night shows. Like, they would be talking about like, Jimmy Fallon or whatever. They'd be joking about it. Like, there's no way that this would have just kind of, I mean, again, it's hard to really know what the reaction was at the time in '88. I mean, I wasn't even alive yet, so it's hard to know if those people did respond to it. But I mean, you're right, dude. I mean, there's sometimes you look at it and you're like, oh, well, this was a foul and they didn't call it in the last couple seconds, and you're like, yeah, but you could see it going either way. I mean, this was egregious. It was egregious in every way imaginable.
I mean, honestly, like, it was an epic failure by the referees. If I was to turn this into a YouTube video, I might title it, like, the greatest failure of refereeing in NBA history or something like that. Like, it was so monumentally screwed up. And, I mean, this is where I get into a little bit of conspiracy theory, where I'm wondering, like, do you think any of this had to do with the league's, like, dislike of the Pistons? Like, because they were not getting any of the calls in the crucial moments of that game. Like every close call was going in favor of the Lakers. Not even just Game 7, in Game 6. Like, that's what kept the series alive. And then they don't put a stop to it when they're on the court. They don't call a foul when Isaiah Thomas, which maybe you could argue either way. Maybe Magic or Isaiah oversold the foul a little bit. But at the very least, like, don't let the play continue when there's people on the court. Like, that's just obvious. And so, but there's people who felt like for years that the Pistons, with their violent play, the way they were basically flagrant fouling everybody before the flagrant foul even existed, like, there's a lot of people who feel like they cheated the game, like that they weren't beating people at basketball, that they were basically just going out there and winning basketball games because they were allowed to just mug people as they were going to the rim. And so there is part of me that wonders that, like, did the refs not like the Pistons either? Are they not giving them the benefit of the fouls? So I don't know. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, I think that maybe there was a little bit of anti-Pistons bias. And I mean, just even the fact that Bill Laimbeer inbounded the ball when there's people on the court. I mean, I don't know how many people for sure, but I mean, to me, it looked like, I don't know what, like at least like 6 people you can see on the court that shouldn't be on the court when Laimbeer is inbounding. I mean, there's several Lakers. There's 2 cameramen, like, literally, like, in the middle of the court. I mean, there's no way the referees would let that fly today. And, I mean, like you were saying, like, the calls-wise, I mean, in the fourth quarter, at the end of the game, the Lakers continuously were going to the free throw line. And, don't get me wrong, I mean, you take a title when you get a title, but, like, if I was a Pistons fan or I hated the Lakers, I
You
would
want to thank
definitely
today's sponsors again? The Tax
give the
Defense
Lakers
Group
crap
and Ryder
for that
Junkie.
title.
You
And
can
I think it's
contact
kind
the
of funny
Tax
is that,
Defense
like,
Group at 800
I don't really hear anybody ever get the Lakers
and Ryder
crap for
Junkie's
that
phone
title.
number again was
I never hear them say anything like, oh, well, you know,
7966.
that title, there's this or that asterisk. I've never heard anybody say there's an asterisk for that title.
I've heard some talk about the phantom foul in Game 6 of this finals. So there are some, but I don't hear them talk about this situation in Game 7 as much. And again, you're talking about, like, they have to go the full length of the court, they have to hit a three-pointer, and they only have 2 seconds left. So so it was a slim chance that they were going to pull it off at that point. But I mean, you have to at least give them that chance. I was surprised Bill even decided to inbound the ball. Like, if I'm Bill Laimbeer and I see that there's freaking, the Laker bench is on the court, like cameramen are walking on the court, I'm not inbounding that ball. And if you try to call a 5-second violation on me for not inbounding the ball when there's people running on the court, dude, there's going to be hell to pay. Like, yeah. I'm not going to accept a 5-second violation when you literally have fans, spectators, and camera people on the court.
I mean, I kind of feel like when that was another weird thing too. I feel like when Bill Laimbeer inbounded the ball, like I feel like his body language was kind of like resigned to the idea that they're gonna lose. Like, it was really weird. Like, he inbounds the ball, but it's like, oh, I'm just going through the motion, and like, you're only down by 3. I mean, if you're down by 15, I get it. You're literally going through the motions. But I mean, down by 3, it's not inconceivable that you do a Hail Mary shot and it actually goes in.
Sure. Well, maybe it was in their body language a little bit. I mean, he still made a decent pass to Isaiah. Isaiah had a shot where he tried to sell the foul. You also have to consider in the 80s, they made like 7 or 8 3-pointers a game compared to like 35 3-pointers a game that they're shooting now. So, I mean, it was definitely slim that they would have been able to pull it off. But, I mean, he had just made a big clutch 3. Dumars had made like a couple threes, I believe. Like, it was doable. It's just really kind of shocking and inexcusable. And that's one thing about the Lakers. They have such a rich history, but there's so many situations that are like tied to some controversy. Like, so many titles where you're like, was that legitimate? And I'm saying this as a Lakers fan. I mean, I can only imagine if this was like a Pistons like podcast we were doing, like what we'd have to say about this game. Oh man.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, I probably feel like the reason why the Pistons don't talk more about, or maybe fans of the team don't talk about it a ton, or like at least that I've seen online, is probably because, the team ends up winning 2 titles anyways. So, I mean, if they never won a title with Isaiah Thomas and that crew, like, I kind of have a feeling that they probably still would not let up about both of those situations, Game 6 and 7. But, yeah, I mean, the fact that you won the 2, it's probably like, all right, Like, 3 is always better than 2, but could you imagine if they never won those titles? Like, if something some kind of freak thing happened and the Pistons never did anything. I mean, I would imagine that Pistons fans would have been just irate, or looking back, like, oh, we got so screwed. The league wanted the Lakers, and
which
it's kind of real. Yeah,
to a certain extent. But I get what you're saying. Like, if this had been the only championship they ever had a shot at winning, oh yeah, they'd never forget go to this. But part of me wonders, like, what a lot of people need to understand about that time is, yes, 80s basketball was violent. There wasn't the flagrant foul until the 1990 season. So when you fouled somebody who was attacking the rim, you got your money's worth. And yeah, there was a lot of teams that did that. The Celtics would do that. The Sixers would do that. Like, Charles Oakley on the Chicago Bulls would foul you hard. Like, there was a lot of good teams that would foul hard. But the Pistons were a level beyond. They just took it to another extreme where they were known as the bad boys, the Raiders of the NBA. They were violent. They were dirty, especially Bill Laimbeer. But that whole team was just seen as a dirty team. There really nobody outside of Detroit, or at least hardly anybody outside of Detroit, liked that team at that time. And so when something like this happens and it's a controversial ending, there's a lot of people that already feels like they've been cheating the game, And so I feel like that might have been part of it, is why there isn't more of an uproar, is because there's basically nobody to come to bat for the Pistons, other than Pistons fans. I mean, because who's going to want to speak up for them? They didn't like them already,
You look back at this finals, 32 years later, and it's like, to this day, the Showtime Lakers is, they're held in the like Mount Rushmore of probably most favorable teams in NBA history. Like, I'm not talking about one specific year, but just, the mystique and the cachet around the team. I mean, they're one of the most famous and beloved teams, I think, probably in NBA history. I mean, definitely, alongside, Michael's Bulls and, I don't know, probably either the 60s Celtics or the 80s Celtics. So, I mean, the Showtime Lakers, I mean, they're in rarefied air. Or even though, Magic and, in the 80s, they won the 5 titles. I mean, for some reason, I think a lot of people view like Showtime Lakers in kind of a higher esteem than Kobe's Lakers, even though Kobe won 5 titles in 10 years. But be that as it may, like, yeah, the Showtime Lakers, it's almost like you can't even like criticize them in some ways. Like, I mean, this is from like a Lakers fan's perspective, and it's just they're held in such high esteem, and probably people hated the Pistons so much that I think there's probably a lot of younger fans of the game that don't even realize that this was like, I mean, this would be such a huge scandal today, the way that the game ended. It really would have been. Like, there would have been so many things about this game. Again, just trying to view it from the lens of how people would have talked about it today. The whatever you want to call them, the talking heads, the people online and whatnot. Like, they would have talked about the controversial end. They would have talked about how Isaiah Thomas probably never should have played in the game. They would have talked about how, like Magic could have been this or that. Like, especially if, like I said earlier, like if Magic and LeBron switch places. But I feel like there's so many takes now. Maybe that's just kind of an indictment on the take system today where, everyone's got to have a take. Like all these talking heads, you can't just simply come out and say, oh, well, like you can't just come out and say, oh, Kawhi Leonard is a good defender. It's like, oh, he's one of the best defenders ever, and he's better than Kobe Bryant. Like when Max Kellerman said that a year ago, and it's like, well, okay, like Kawhi had one good run. What are we talking about now here? Like, how did you get so hyperbolic so fast? And I don't know. I guess that's one thing I thought about during the game is like, I guess maybe the sports world, they were less just hot takey. Right. I don't know.
Right. I forgot who said it, but it's so true that it's not the true take that gets attention nowadays. It's the hot take. And so everything's just so radicalized, sensationalized now when it comes to sports takes. And because a couple things that you didn't even mention is like 4 points and 3 rebounds from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He's old. He needs to retire. Like that's another thing. They'd be trying to force Kareem into retirement. And he played for another couple years after this. He has 38,000 points. And a big reason why he has 38,000 points was the fact that he played a couple seasons after this. Nobody criticizes him now for playing those extra seasons. But after this game, they would have been saying he needed to retire. And then even look at Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman, was a great player. We remember, like, he won a couple Defensive Player of the Year awards with the Pistons. We remember that he was great with the Chicago Bulls in their three-peat, dynasty. But you remember the end of the game. It's like a one-possession game. It's like a 3-point game. Less than a minute left to go in the game. They're running the ball up with transition. Rodman has the ball, and he shoots like an 18-footer. Rodman just like an 18-footer, bricks it. Chuck Daly is beside himself. He can't even believe that Rodman took that shot. Like, why of all people is Dennis Rodman shooting a 17, 18-footer within a one-possession game? Like, he never shoots jumpers. He's not a fantastic offensive player. So I could see them saying, oh, they need to trade Rodman. Like, that's just stupid and poor execution, and Isaiah can't have this on the team, that sort of thing. And I think sports media is just way too reactive and doesn't always see things with the big picture. And it's almost become toxic to a certain extent when you see the way they can contradict themselves from week to week. Lots of crazy stuff to this game, no doubt.
Especially like in the light of, after watching The Last Dance a couple months ago or whenever, I think, it ran from middle of April to middle of May. It was kind of nice seeing Rodman there. Then, you compare and contrast him to the Rodman of the 97-98 season. I mean, talk about really coming out of your shell. I feel like in this game, if he was, what is it? It's a caterpillar turned into a butterfly, right?
Sure.
It kind of seemed like that, where it's like you look at him and like looks normal, behaves kind of normal, and then you fast forward to 10 years later and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy is like so been bombastic, and like I don't know, I even feel like with Rodman, like even when I was a kid, like even I didn't really follow the NBA that closely, like I mean I was a kid, like I grew up in the 90s, and I mean even as a kid I knew who Dennis Rodman was. Like everyone knew who Dennis Rodman was. I feel like even if you didn't follow any sports, like you knew Michael Jordan, you knew Dennis Rodman, and I don't know, it was kind of, I don't, for some reason, I just kind of like him as a player. I mean, I think he's like incredibly fascinating. And if there was one NBA player, one athlete, professional athlete I could ever interview for my own show, I mean, I kind of feel like Dennis Rodman would be at the top of that list. I mean, I don't know if he would be the top of the list, but definitely near the top. I just feel like, I don't know, here's a dude that's just a crazy life, just incredibly interesting life. And I don't know, it was nice to see him out there. And it was interesting too, because I also feel like, you watch like The Last Dance and you look at the 90s in general, and like, it feels like a different era of basketball in a lot of ways. I mean, the way that they're playing is so much different, but you look at like even things like the way that the game was filmed and presented to people, I feel like in a lot of ways is more modern in some regards, like just like the camera angles and things like that, like the high quality, especially when the footage is a little higher quality, where like the 90s, it doesn't seem like that far away, and I feel like in this finals, the 88 finals, I kind of feel like it still feels like a really long time ago, kind of in that like transition period where it's like, okay, we're almost in the 90s, but just even the things like with the short shorts and, just like the way, like the court, like the way that like, the form, the actual hardwood itself was like, the design on it looked like so not modern, and I think that was just one thing that was interesting, because I feel like in my mind, I kind of viewed like Rodman as almost this little bit of like a transitional player where it's like, here he is in the late 80s playing, but then like, you fast forward and he's in the late 90s, and even too, like when you think the 90s, like even though virtually every player now with Vince Carter retiring, basically everyone now drafted from the 90s is out of the league now, but like there's a lot of players that played with players that came from the 90s. I mean, you look at like a guy like LeBron, I mean, he played against players that were from the 90s era, and I guess what I'm really rambling on about or trying to get to is just, it was interesting to see Rodman there, especially comparing and contrasting him after, The Last Dance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing interesting about Rodman is, we see certain players who are around for a while who they evolve into another kind of player, but I don't know if anybody's as dramatic as Dennis Rodman, because when he comes into the league, not just his style and the fact that he looks a little bit more just like a regular guy. And by the end of the Bulls, he's got all the tattoos and he's got all the colored hair and everything. But even just his play style and his build, like he was this lengthy, athletic, quick guy with the Pistons. And one thing that kind of, just is kind of a crazy reminder is how talented this Pistons team was. Like Rodman doesn't check into the game for the first time until there's like 2 minutes left in the first quarter. I'm like, you've gone through 10 minutes of the game. Now we're just seeing Dennis Rodman, and so that's a testament to the talent of the Pistons, but also the fact that, he was still kind of finding his way a little bit. But as he got later into his career, he really bulks up, because early in his career, Rodman's defending the guards. You see him defending Magic Johnson a lot. You see him on the perimeter, like point guards, shooting guards. Like those are a lot of the guys he's on, sometimes small forwards. But then, later in his career, he becomes a power forward. Now you see him on the super buff Karl Malones. He's even guarding Shaq at times and doing a pretty good job of it. Like big built Laker Shaq. That's who Dennis Rodman's guarding. So it's really crazy to just see how he evolved as a player. And I think subconsciously, like a lot of young fans, like you're saying about how the game's changed, even the quality of the video, I really think it subconsciously plays a part in how they view the game and how they basically interpret the talent that they're witnessing.
Yeah.
Like, because it's lower quality video, it's lower quality basketball. Which, can be true in some eras with some teams and that sort of thing, but I think it's done a lot. And these were great teams. Like this was great basketball played between great teams. I think what's funny is there is not many 3-pointers compared to the amount of 3-pointers now. Like most of the game is happening around the painted area. Like there is some times where the defense is so collapsed where it's like you've got all 5 defensive players like all hovering right on the edge of the painted area. And it's like you never see that now. Like none of them are out that far. They're almost daring them to shoot 3-pointers. But But honestly, I don't think it was the fact that they couldn't shoot 3-pointers. It was just how they interpreted it back then. It's like, that's not the most high quality shot, So they just didn't shoot it as much. I think it's crazy because Larry Bird was like one of the greatest 3-point shooters of all time, and he talks about how he barely worked on his 3-point shot. Like, he worked on his mid range, he worked on his footwork. He shot a lot of free throws. But he said, oh, yeah, he never really just shot a bunch of 3-point shots. He was just, like, naturally really good. And so that's easy. Yeah.
I think you raised a really interesting point about the video quality. Like, when I was watching, for some reason, it reminded me of, like, my grandmother. Like, I remember going to her apartment in the Valley, like, in the 90s. And, like, I have an older brother, and he had a bunch of VHS tapes of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like the show from the 80s and 90s, or just 80s. And, like, every time you put one of the VHS in and you're watching it on an old TV, on a VCR, and even at that time in the 90s, I was watching, I'm like, man, this looks so grainy, and this looks so old. I remember thinking, that kind of reminded me of this game, like, watching it on YouTube last night. Like, it felt so, like, old. Like, like you were saying, I mean, it's not even necessarily like an indictment on the players of what they can and can't do, because I mean, from a physicality standpoint, they're able to do dunks and alley-oops and fast breaks. I mean, so from that standpoint, it's not like they can't do things that players can do today, at least from that standpoint. But yeah, just watching the old tape, and the fact that the players aren't necessarily as like buff now as like players today. Like, I mean, like, like, my gosh, like, how many players in that whole series look like they had the physique of like LeBron or Giannis, or like the arms of Kawhi? Like, no one's built like that. I mean, I didn't notice anybody. I remember thinking that, like, I don't remember anybody looking like a physical specimen like a Dwight Howard, especially Dwight in his prime. It looked like he was made of granite. But like, they kind of, in a lot of ways, they kind of looked like they were in shape people, but not necessarily like totally buff. And yeah, I think that's another big thing you mentioned too about, Rodman. Like, 10 years later, I mean, Rodman was just jacked. He looked like he could wrestle, and he did wrestle. I mean, he looked like he belonged in the WWF at that time. Like, he looked like he had the body of someone that could wrestle, and he looked like he was incredibly strong. And in 88, he kind of looked like a really, I mean, even though it's interesting, in 88, I think, what was he, like 25, 26? Like, he wasn't like he was 19 years old, like, oh, he has to fill into his body. He was already mid-20s. Most people by their mid-20s are filled into their bodies. So, like, it's just fascinating to see him go from that to 98, where he just looks like, yeah, it looks like he could almost compete in a strongman contest. I mean, you even see in players too, like, look at like Michael from 88 to 98. I mean, by 98, look at his physique and how much he transformed his body.
Yeah, I think what people do is first of all, players are more built like from a muscular standpoint because of all the workout programs they have. They just know how to train their bodies more. But I think a lot of people make the mistake of translating that to like the level of athleticism or how good they were as basketball players. Because you think of guys in like the 80s or 90s, like David Robinson was jacked. I'm not going to say David Robinson's a greater center than Hakeem Olajuwon because David Robinson was clearly stronger. You know what I'm saying?
That's a good point too.
A guy like Xavier McDaniel. I'm not sure if you remember Xavier McDaniel, but he played for the Sonics a little bit, and he was an all-star like once or twice late in the 80s, but he was a jacked dude. He even played with the Knicks. You saw him fighting with Michael Jordan at one point during The Last Dance, but he was a dude who was just ripped. Like, he looks like a modern-day player who like really spends a lot of time on the gym working on his physique. He's not a better player than Reggie Miller. I feel like I could get in a fight with Reggie Miller and I might win it. Like, the dude's so scrawny, but who's a better player, like Reggie Miller or Xavier McDaniel? Dude, it's no question it's Reggie. And so, or even Kevin Durant nowadays. Like, Kevin Durant, he's tall, but he's skinny. His nickname's the Slim Reaper. But so I think a lot of people just they're being a little too simplistic and really don't see the talent of these 80s, because there were so many things that stood out in this game and that stands out to me from that era. Like Magic Johnson, he's got that high dribble. He's always dribbling on his right, and he's got a high dribble. And I always get this that he's dribbling it high because at any point he might just send a one-handed rocket to a teammate, just fling that thing to him super fast. Or even Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars. Like, you got like a 6-foot point guard, and you got like a 6'3" shooting guards, like two small guys. But the way Joe Dumars handles the ball, like, man, he can handle the rock. He looks like Kyrie Irving or Kemba Walker out there sometimes. And just picturing those two guards with the spacing now and the shooting and the green light they've been given in 2020, like, dude, those two, that backcourt, they would destroy in the NBA today. So I think there's more nuances to 80s basketball and 90s basketball and what makes it special, and that I don't think a lot of fans recognize.
I mean, I think you're right. And I think it is kind of simplistic to just say, oh, well, the video quality was crap, or look, the players don't look as athletic. I mean, I think that is very simplistic. I know, I guess it's one thing that kind of sucks about the past is that, you know, it's easy to kind of overlook the past the further removed you are from it. You know, like the other day I was watching ESPN, and they were showing the documentary about Cleveland sports teams. I think the documentary is called Believeland. And, you know, towards the end of it, they talk about the 2016 Cleveland team and winning the title. And yeah, I was thinking about that title. I'm like, oh man, yeah, what a great title, what a great series, and everything like that. And then I started thinking, like, dude, it's been 4 years since that happened. Like, literally, like that Game 7 happened like over 4 years ago now. And you look back and you're like, wow, it's already been that long. And yeah, I mean, you look back at this series, I mean, we're talking 32 years ago. So, I mean, really, to have appreciated like that Game 7 in 88, like to appreciate that at that time and be alive today, I mean, you basically would have had to been, you'd at least have to be like late 40s, really. I mean, maybe if you were like 12, so that would make you today 44 years old. I mean, to appreciate it at the time, you know what I mean? Like watch it and appreciate it. So, you know, as time goes by, you know, there's just a further removing, you know, we're just being removed from that even greater. But yeah, I mean, I think with this game, I mean, it was a classic. I mean, I couldn't imagine watching this live at the time, being a fan of either franchise or especially the Lakers. Like being a fan of the Lakers watching this game in real time, not knowing what was going to happen. I mean, that would have been just so gut-wrenching. They're losing the lead, and they played I don't think they played very well the first half, and you know, for them to win it in the way that they wanted, you know, it's probably like, you know, don't talk about this. I mean, it's probably like the same way that the Boston Patriots or the New England Patriots feel about most of their titles. It's like, you know, even though we cheated for most of them, don't bring that up. We still won the title, even though for us we didn't cheat. But yeah, you know, Boston fans, they have to lie to themselves to appreciate their titles. So I guess for us, it's kind of like we're just overlooking it, being like, oh yeah, you know, that's one of our 16. Did it end a weird way? Oh yeah, for sure ended in a weird way. And, you know, there's no way that they should have allowed Bill Laimbeer to inbound the ball, but, you know, I guess it is what it is. But, well, Jonny, man, thank you for coming on for this first episode. And, dude, I look forward to do another one with you. And I thought this went well, man. Dude, I can't wait to continue talking about the Showtime Lakers and did all the great stuff they did, and just just a piece of history they have on, you know, basketball history, obviously, you know, an LA history, and us both being guys right outside of LA. I mean, yeah, the impacts on us and everything. And dude, I definitely look forward to recording the next episode with you. We want to thank today's sponsors again, the Tax Defense Group and Writer Junkie. You can contact the Tax Defense Group at 800-850-7973. And Writer Junkie's phone number again was 805-587-7966.